National Assembly resuming its sitting after a 2-month recess. Question is, what is the legislative agenda of both houses? That is the live discussion that we'll be having here, and we'll also be having an interactive session where my colleague Abdiaziz Hashim is at the National Assembly, and we'll be ready to engage the clerk of the National Assembly just to give us a feel of how this session will go. I've mentioned and said that it's momentous because it's the first time that under the Kenya Kwanza government that the High Court 3-judge bench of Justice Chigiti, Justice Lawrence Mugambi and Justice Jairus Nga last week ruled that the Kenya Kwanza administration does not have the majority in the National Assembly. And not only that, they also opened that Speaker Moses Masika Wetangula cannot be a speaker and still hold a position as Ford Kenya leader. Well, all the drama will be unfolding at the August House, but we will be here to ensure that we keep you afloat on all that. And still on the legislative agenda, on the other hand, we'll also be discussing a little bit later on the state of the nation and the politics that come with that. But that's a little later. But first things first, let's first of all cross over to the National Assembly, where my colleague is on standby for that interactive segment.
Well, thank you so much. We're coming to you live from Parliament, more so from the Senate, given the Senate is set to resume this afternoon, and of course marking the beginning of the full session of the 4th Senate. The session follows a long recess that began in early December. We want to look what is in store for the senators, of course, who will be sitting in the 4th Senate in the year 2025. Joining us to just expound on that is the Clerk of the Senate, that is Mr. Jeremiah Nyengere, to tell us about what is in store for the senators. Clerk, thank you for joining us on KBC Channel 1.
Happy to be here.
And maybe we start on that note, Clerk. What is in store for the senators the year 2025 as and when they resume this afternoon?
So thank you very much, Abdi, and good morning to all our viewers. So the Senate, as is well known in terms of the Constitution of Kenya, is one of the 2 chambers of Parliament under Article 93 of the Constitution, which together, the 2 chambers are the legislature, making laws for our country, exercising oversight over state officers, representing the people. So we start the 4th session of the 13th Parliament this afternoon, and we will be launching straight into the triple mandate of the legislature, namely legislation, representation, and oversight. The particulars of which, of course, you understand that our legislature is predicated on political parties. So the majority party has its agenda, the minority party has its agenda. The first business today, as is the case on every first day of the start of a session, is the constitution of the Senate Business Committee. It is a Senate Business Committee which, when constituted, that's why if you look at the order paper for today, and if our viewers have gone onto the website to look for the order paper, you will find that there is no business listed other than the business of the constitution of the Senate Business Committee, because all the business that comes before the Senate is determined by the Senate Business Committee, being the committee made up of the majority and the minority side, who together decide what the agenda of the Senate will be. So as soon as we constitute the Senate Business Committee this afternoon, the House will then adjourn so that the Senate Business Committee meets to then agree on the agenda tomorrow and going on. Yes.
And committee set up, what key areas, given that you have been here for a number of years, tell us what are some of these bills that will be given precedence once the Senate Business Committee is set up?
It will not be appropriate to preempt the Business Committee, but it is in the public domain that one of the key items of business in the Senate is going to be the matter of the 4th basis of the sharing of revenue. The public must have gotten a glimpse of that when the Senate met in Naivasha earlier in last week, and a presentation was made by the Commission on Revenue Allocation, and that from history is going to be a key item that the Senate will be considering in terms of the Senate's mandate under Article 217 of the Constitution. The Commission on Revenue Allocation recommends the basis, but it is the Senate that makes that determination. So that's going to be a key item. For other matters, the legislative agenda, we have many bills carried over from the last session, but it is appropriate that the Senate Business Committee makes the determination on the prioritization of that business.
So the revenue sharing, I'll be asking you a little bit later on, given that the Intergovernmental Relations Technical Committee gazetted that some functions are supposed to go to the county, and we know once it is gazetted, the Senate has to play a role in ensuring that those areas are at least devolved and the funds with it will come. So maybe let me pick your mind on that, Clerk. You tell us about, in terms of as and when IGTRC gazetted that particular functions, these governors and the senators are complaining about those functions. Yes, they were devolved, but the funds did not come with those functions. So are we going to see at any point the Senate intervening?
Well, the business of the Senate, as is known under Article 96 of the Constitution, is a protector and a custodian of counties and county governments and their interests. Therefore, any matter that is of concern to counties and to their governments is going to be key on the agenda of the Senate. It is also known that in terms of the Constitution, funds must follow functions. So you are right, this will be an area of high on the agenda of the Senate.
Of solving the quagmire, because we have seen what has happened in the past between the two houses. Committees have been formed to at least address this particular issue of equitable share revenue. What will be different this year around in terms of solving that quagmire?
I wouldn't call it a quagmire because the Constitution is clear on the roles of the various state organs, constitutional entities. The CRA makes its recommendation, and it has done so. The Senate considers the recommendations made. We are talking about revenue sharing. This is an emotive matter. We are talking about everyone looking out for the interests of their respective counties. So it's a usual democratic process. It will involve a lot of to and fro. It will involve a lot of negotiation. So I shouldn't call that a quagmire. It is democracy at play. It is a constitutional design, as it were. It is what the Senate was established to undertake. And ultimately, we will come up with a basis one way or the other. It took almost a year the last time with the third basis, but eventually we got a basis which has been in operation. So it's not a quagmire as such. It is a democratic process at play, and we expect that the various organs will play their role as envisaged by the Constitution.
Oversaw the induction of the Fourth Senate. You have been there. What achievements has the Fourth Senate achieved so far?
Well, there have been a good number of achievements. So first, the Senate's role, I will emphasize, is looking out for the interests of counties and their governments. So to the extent that every subsequent Senate has seen the increase in the funding that's made available, the equitable share of funding that's made available to counties, this is a success, and this Senate has been no exception. You know that in the current financial year, the funds, the equitable share has risen to 387 billion, which is a significant rise from when we started off in 2013 at only 190 billion. So to the extent that every successive Senate has seen the increase in the equitable share, to the extent that this particular Senate has also seen to the rise in the equitable share, that is a major success. Of course, there have also been pieces of legislation that have come from the Senate that have had far-reaching consequences and impact on the operations of counties. I will give an example of the County Uniform Licensing Act, which has been passed by this Senate, which has had the effect of standardizing and harmonizing license procedures across counties. This was a key area of concern to business people, that while they conduct business across counties, they were being encumbered by circumstances in which there were multiple licenses on the same goods or on the same product or on the same services. There were very complex and unduly bureaucratic processes. So enacting a legislation that brings uniformity to licensing procedures and the licenses, that is a key win for business across counties. I will also give an example of the Assumption of Office of Governor Act, providing for the procedure and the ceremony for the assumption of office of governor, because this had become befuddled in some confusion. There wasn't a uniform procedure for the ceremony, and that was causing quite some difficulties at the counties. There have been a multiplicity of amendments to the County Governments Act, which have made various changes to the County Governments Act, one of which was to ensure the full participation of nominated MCAs at the county level, because what was happening in the past was that after the elections, the elected senators were getting sworn in and constituting committees and getting elected to various committees before the nominated senators came on board. And that effectively meant that the nominated senators were coming on board to play second fiddle, because they would find that the business of the county is very far advanced. All the committee chairs have been elected, committees have been assigned, and so you're just coming in to fill the numbers, as it were. So that's a major reform that has been put in place. We have had many petitions which are made to the Senate, and the Senate conducts inquiries looking to what is afflicting the people that have put forward the petitions and proposing legislation. Sometimes the inquiry on itself is capable of eliciting action. And I would like to give a very famous matter of Owino Ouru village in Mikindani ward in Jomvu constituency in Mombasa County, where a petition was made to the Senate about the effects of lead poisoning. A plant was in the area and was affecting the health of the residents. And the Senate's inquiry into the matter prompted the closure of the plant. So there are many things that the Senate is doing. The Senate's flagship, Senate Mashinani, for example, has had a major impact on taking the Senate, the legislature, to the people. For many people, this is the first time they are able to interact with the legislature face to face without having to travel hundreds of miles to Nairobi. For example, the last Senate Mashinani was held in Turkana, and it was very exciting for many of the residents who never believed that a state organ would come out and meet them in situ where they are. It's regrettable that the last Senate Mashinani, which was supposed to be held in Busia last year in September, was not held because of budgetary constraints. we are hopeful that in the next financial year, our circumstances will improve and the Senate can go back to its tradition of holding a Senate machinani every year in one or other county, and in particular, the promise we made to the people of Busia, we are coming back to Busia. So Busia, we will be there, hopefully later this year, but if not this year, whenever, we will go to Busia.
And one of the major achievements that you've made, especially when it comes to listening to impeachment cases, which were so many last year, including most of the governors. We even saw an instance where the Senate Speaker clearly stated that you cannot count a half a man. So in terms of the lessons that you have learned so that you can improve the oversight mandate of this House, what are those key lessons that you have learned in the impeachment procedures, especially when it comes to governors?
It's a good question you ask, because we have put together a manual on the process of impeachment, which will shortly be available to the public, where we list the experiences that we have gained over the years since the first impeachment, Wambora 1, up to the very latest, the Kawera Mwangaza impeachment. We're talking about governors. There was, of course, the one for the deputy president. We chronicle in this manual the lessons that we have learned, and there have been many, including the process of impeachment committee versus plenary, and how each of those processes play out, including issues of due process, issues of representation, and the right to representation by the state officers who come before us, including the timelines and how to deal with those timelines. So there are many lessons that have been learned, and the process improves. Every successive process, I think the public will have observed that every successive process has been an improvement in terms of the procedures and the manner in which it is executed from the previous one. It's been an improvement each time.
Yeah, and of course the precedence, I talked clearly stated we cannot count half a man. So is that a precedence that of course the Senate will be using over the years now?
Yes, you know that the Parliament generally and the Senate legislatures are houses of tradition and precedent. So when a determination is made by a speaker, successive speakers will be bound, unless, of course, there are exceptional reasons for them to depart. Otherwise, the speakers are guided by the Constitution, they are guided by the laws, they are guided by the traditions, they are guided by precedents and practices from our parliament and from other parliaments. So determinations made by one speaker will usually be binding on successive speakers, unless there are exceptional reasons requiring them to depart from those precedents, yes.
And we've seen a piece of legislation even from the National Assembly. Public participation has been a key issue, especially when matters are taken to the court. So is this something that the Senate is considering this year?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. The public participation law has been long in development, and it needs to be concluded, a legislative framework on public participation, because if there is one thing that the courts have been very clear about, it has been on the matter of public participation. Public participation is central to this constitutional dispensation. There is no running away from it. The courts have made it very clear. Public participation cannot be artificial. It cannot be cosmetic. The people must be, it has to be qualitative. It has to be, there is a quantitative and qualitative aspects of it. It has to be shown that the views of the public were genuinely sought. They were genuinely considered. and where they were meritorious, they were taken into account. It needs to be shown that the public were aware what it was that they were participating on. So the jurisprudence that has been built by the courts since 2010, with the coming into effect of the Constitution of Kenya 2010, has been extensive. Perhaps in no other area, there's probably no other area in which the courts have built such a rich jurisprudence in the Constitution of Kenya than on the matter of public participation. So the Senate is very conscious of all the determinations that have been made by the courts in this matter, and we are abiding. You will observe that calls for public participation now differ from what they were before. They will detail the nature of what is in issue. They will labor to explain what the consequences of any of the proposed legislation is. They will provide a minimum time frame. The courts have said it's not possible to make it a cosmetic exercise. You must give adequate time. So yes, the Senate will abide and is abiding by the requirements of public participation, and is happy to abide because the Constitution, the laws, the proposed laws, they belong to the people, and the people must participate. They must bring their aspirations to bear.
About the public clerk, you do know the view the public have, especially when it comes to the National Assembly and the Senate as a whole, Parliament as a whole. So to change the mindset of the people to think that the legislature is an appendage of another arm of the government, what will the Senate do to change the mindset of the public?
First, it needs to be understood that we have one legislature with two chambers. And it is not some kind of mistake. It is not some kind of duplication. The two chambers were deliberately designed by the people of Kenya to act as checks and balances. Within the legislature itself, the two chambers act as checks and balances on one another. So, for example, a view that holds that if one chamber of Parliament has considered a matter, it is a duplication for the other chamber to consider it, is an entirely mistaken view. It's a mistaken view because this is the congenital design of the legislature by the Constitution, that the two chambers look at legislation, look at proposed legislation from different prisms. So the prism from which, the lenses from which the Senate approaches, for example, proposed legislation on health, would be different than the lenses from which the National Assembly approaches. The Senate will go in there looking at the extent to which the devolved mandate is observed, looking at the responsibilities that are being placed on the counties and the manner in which they will be executed. So the public needs to have faith in the legislative process. It may be a little longer on account of consideration by both chambers, but it's absolutely crucial that the organs designated by the Constitution to prosecute their mandate do so in the manner that the Constitution envisages.
The outstanding challenge that the Senate will be facing, especially talk to us about the budget cuts that the Senate could face in the financial year.
So it needs to be understood that the Senate is not operating in isolation. Everybody knows the turbulence that the country encountered in terms of its finances. Everyone knows about the Finance Bill 2023. Everyone knows about the failure of the rejection of the Finance Act 2024 and the consequential cuts. So these consequential cuts and the budget cuts were not, the Senate was not alone in suffering these budget cuts. These budget cuts affected all arms and all organs of government. So this has called for austerity. It would have been better for us if we had all the resources that we required, but we don't operate in isolation. We are part of a greater government. If the funding is limited, we have to work within the constraints that we find ourselves in. But of course that affects the extent to which committees can undertake their work, particularly the nature of the Senate is requires that the Senate visits the counties, undertakes inquiries in the counties. There's no way of determining a petition without meeting petitioners. Petitions will usually be about some matter on the ground. There is need to visit the site to talk to the people. So programs are affected and activities are affected, and the legislative mandate is affected. And it just requires innovation, it requires austerity. But we are hopeful that circumstances will improve in the next financial year, and the Senate can fully undertake its mandates.
That we're coming to an end of this particular interview. Lastly, we witnessed last year where the National Assembly was accusing the Senate, especially the Transport Committee of the National Assembly, given that the Senate Transport Committee was dealing with the Adani issue. It started with the Senate, went to the Transport Committee of the National Assembly. So in terms of overlapping mandate, is there a clear clarification or demarcation what the Senate is supposed to handle and what the National Assembly is expected to handle when it comes to the committees?
It needs to be noted, and I think there are many people who labor under this misapprehension. The Senate is not a county legislature. The Senate is a national legislature. It's a national, an organ of the national legislature. So whereas the legislative mandate of the Senate is limited under Article 96 of the Constitution, the representative mandate of the Constitution of the Senate is not similarly limited. So, as I have said previously in this interview, Abdi, the legislature is deliberately designed with the two chambers to act as checks and balances on one another. And transport and various aspects of transport definitely fall within the mandate of the Senate. It is not conceivable that any matter can affect issues of transport on the national plane and somehow be totally removed from the mandate of the Senate. One of the things that everyone needs to know is that we don't have national government existing outside counties, or counties existing outside the national government. They are concurrent. And the important point to note is that the representative role of the Senate is not limited, that the Senate is a national legislature, not a county one, except that it approaches matters with a keen eye on the defense of the interests of counties and their governments.
Accountability and transparency. You do know, Clerk, the issue that came out, especially from the youth of this particular country, is that the arms of the government are not listening to their concerns. Will the Senate this year around listen to the concerns of the people?
We don't have a choice. No one has a choice. You have to listen. I would hope that we have been listening. I would hope that the Senate has been listening. Perhaps listen more, and listen more keenly, and listen more perceptively, and listen to all the nuances. But no one has an option. It is not a choice. The legislature belongs to the people. The laws that are made, all the business transacted here in the Senate, in the legislature, is the business of the people. So listening is not a choice.
Now, as we wind up, what can Kenyans look for this year?
The Senate will continue to be steadfast and robust in looking out for the interests of counties and their governments. This is the mandate of the Senate under Article 96. But more than that, the Senate is a chamber of the national legislature. The Senate is interested in matters and will prosecute matters that resonate with the pulse of the nation, that are close, that affect the lives, the livelihoods, the property of the citizens of this country. So we are excited that the new session starts today and that the Senate will continue to prosecute its important roles as designated in the Constitution.
Your time, and of course that was the clerk of the Senate, Mr. Jeremiah, just expounding on the packed items that the legislative agenda that the Senate will be undertaking in the year 2025. You do know he clearly stated earlier on, if you're just joining us, that of course it will be among the reconstitution of the Senate Business Committee, given that you do know that is the main event that is we're expecting from the floor of the House. We had to even hear from the Speaker of the Senate, that is Jeffrey Amason Kingi, in terms of the reconstitution of some key committees within the Senate. But for now, I need to hand you over back to studio as we carry on with the conversation. Back to you in studio.
Many thanks, Abdi Hashim, there at the office of the clerk of the Senate there, Jeremiah Nyengenye there. And actually they have outlined some of the things that we can expect as Kenyans in regards to the Senate. Remember, even the National Assembly has its sittings today. It's a recess after 2 months. Now they are back. But just to pinpoint some of the things that the clerk has mentioned is that the reconstitution of key Senate committees is on top of the agenda, and also the division of revenue bill. This is something that has been on Kenya's mind at the Senate, at counties since 2013, but we'll also take stock of what they have been able to do. About 190 billion in 2013. Now we are talking about 387 billion in regards to that. But first things first, before I introduce my panel of guests, and also before we outline some of the legislative agenda of both houses and some of the things that we can expect as Kenyans, let's first of all now cross over to the 2025 Safer Internet Day celebration. And as you can see, PS Kisiangani is currently speaking. Let's listen in.
And many people are seated there